Okay, well, we are officially at the top of the hour and we have a full room and a lot to talk about. So I'll go ahead and call us to order here. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Paige Walters, President of the Springfield City Club Board of Directors. And could the rest of my fellow board members who are in the room just raise your hand? You look around. If you have a question, ask those folks. We're on behalf of the whole board. We're really glad to see so many of you here today as we continue our tradition of fostering civic dialogue around issues that matter most to Springfield. Big thank you to Roy Rapids for hosting our programs and to our city club members whose support makes these gatherings possible. I see a lot of faces in the room. If you're not a member, please consider joining and supporting our ability to gather citizens of Springfield for civic dialogue. Our focus this afternoon is on Springfield's fiscal stability. This is an issue that directly impacts the services, the public safety, and the quality of life in our community. As many of you know, the city's general fund faces both a long-term structural imbalance as well as a short-term budget deficit. So we're joined today by Mayor Sean VanGordon, who convened the Fiscal Stability Task Force earlier this year. And Mayor VanGordon has served the city of Springfield since 2011, first on Springfield City Council, now as mayor. He's here today to share an overview of the task force's process, its recommendations, and the principles guiding their work. He's also joined today by Anne Marie Levis, president of Fund Levis, who was the contracted facilitator working with the task force. Again, there's a few new faces in the room, so I'll go over. We'll save ample time today for question and answer and discussion around the Springfield's fiscal strategy moving forward. We'll keep our Q&A time fairly informal, but please raise your hand and wait to be called on if you have a question. Just a reminder that your questions should be concise so that we can give everybody a chance to ask their questions, and of course, respectful. For those of you who are joining via Zoom, our board member Len Goodwin is monitoring the chat. If you have a question, please go ahead and either post your question in the chat or let him know that you'd like to be unmuted to ask your question. And with that, please help me welcome Anne Marie Levis and Mayor Sean VanGordon.
Thank you, Paige. I told her when I showed up today, whenever she's in charge, I know everything's gonna go flawless. So no matter what I do, she makes it work. So it makes me happy. So I'm the introduction and then I leave it to the important person in the room, the mayor. What I wanted to do is go through a quick presentation just for those of us who do a better job seeing things than just hearing numbers and understanding. It gives us the ability to sort of show you the work of the task force.
Okay.
What I will say is, I've had a long career and this has to be one of my very favorite projects that I've ever done. The work of the committee was amazing. I have to say the staff in the city of Springfield are inspiring. And the end result of this project was something that I'm just super proud of. So wanted to talk a little bit about this. It was a technical advisory committee, so bringing in people that had real good technical expertise on budgetary, giving recommendations to the city council and what we called 4 areas or 4 buckets: cost cutting, revenue options, economic development, and legislative. And what I really appreciated from both the mayor and the city manager is, at the outset, I said, everything had to be on the table. We were not going to have certain areas that we said, oh, we're not going to talk about that. I mean, there were certain things that really we couldn't do just because it didn't fall within the general fund, but everything else was on the table. And I will tell you, the staff answered every single question and went through all of the details. I just wanted to show you for a second the people that were on the committee. Phil Farrington is in the room. Bonnie is in the room. I think those are the only 2 committee members. Sorry. Senator Bonnie, I haven't missed you. So we had an extraordinary committee. We met every week. People did homework in between. It was an intense process and just really wonderful. wanted to show you a visual of what we were trying to solve for. The city, as all of the cities, I would say, in the state of Oregon are facing this structural imbalance in their budgets. The city this year took an additional, if you look and see the 1.75 million, they took additional cuts this year to go through a balancing effect. But this goes up over the next 5 years. So the focus of the task force was about $4.5 million of structural changes to the balance to give the team at the city of Springfield the ability to right size the budget and do some longer term things. But it was an interesting challenge. We've done a couple of these presentations and people say, well, did you think about, did you think about, did you think about? And so what I wanted to show today was there were all sorts of ideas for cost cutting. People looked high and low. We looked into every single thing. I often joke, it's like coins in the couch cushion. What could we do to make any sort of changes? But we looked at everything and evaluated it. There were 3 partners to this, so I just want to talk for a second about that. The city of Springfield and the staff, my firm helping to facilitate and drive to the recommendations with the committee, and a person from Eco Northwest who did looking at benchmarking with other cities, looking at the data, helping us to put together some really good, you'll see them in a minute, but sort of evaluation in a very dispassionate way. So instead of it being subjective, well, we like this, so we don't want to cut that. It really was, how could we be objective about things instead of subjective? We looked at quite a few different ideas for revenues as well, because early on, we realized you can't do everything via just cost cutting. Did I order pizza or did somebody else? May not be in this room. Okay. Good little pause. I'll take a pizza. We also looked extensively at economic development. Early on, we realized you can't just immediately grow your way out. You can't say, okay, we're gonna get 5 more international paper and we'll be good. That's not really realistic, but we've looked at a lot of different options for economic development, as well as some of the longer term legislative ideas. So I don't do this as an eye test, but what I'm trying to show you is it was a really comprehensive committee looking at a lot of different ideas. So I'll move on to the real meat of this and where the committee came to their recommendations from all of this. This is a bit the work of Eco Northwest to help us. So we had criteria, and I'll just sort of impact to general fund, which was an important part, fiscal sustainability. So it wouldn't just be one-time dollars, but it would go on to look at economic competitiveness, impact to the community, implementation, practicality, viability and feasibility, and then community fairness. And then we also had if there were other considerations as well. So the committee discussed this and went through. So the first recommendation was looking at the current levies, police and fire levies. What we found is they weren't covering the full costs of what they were set out to do. So the committee recommended to increase the current levies to cover those full costs. The city council has actually gone and started this process. So it was a committee recommendation, but working concurrently with the work of the city council. It was very important with this committee that they didn't just look at revenues, that they really clearly considered what could be cut, even in a budget where there's only a 10% overhead, which I just want to pause for a second and say that again. A 10% overhead of administrative functions. That's one person deep in anything. So it's a slim budget that the city of Springfield has. But the committee said, we really have to carefully look at what could be done in cuts. So as we went back through all of the different cuts that could have been made, the committee felt that this could be a cut that could be sustained, but would not impact the library to a really hard effect. One consideration was just get rid of the library entirely, and the committee very much felt a commitment to the library, and that was an important part of the quality of life for the city of Springfield. So they looked at just taking $500,000 off the library budget. The third one was developing a shared payroll tax with guardrails. Looking at ways to have a different sort of revenue, a different source that could bring in dollars that wouldn't be impacted by other things. Looking at having clear guardrails, so it wasn't just you start here and you go to here, but have clear guardrails to reach that $2.3 million. We looked at traffic cameras as a way, maybe not specifically to generate a lot of dollars, and any dollars that would be generated would go directly to lowering some of the costs for police. So we really looked at this and categorized it as more of a health and safety to implement that. And then looking again at health and safety to decrease some of the police overtime. This is a complicated subject and I could talk ad nauseum about it, but especially through COVID, through some of the things that have gone on, we've lost some of our police. It has caused some of the ripple effects. It's difficult to hire. It takes a while to bring in new police officers. And so we have imbalance that we have steadily been working down with the police over time, but this was a key recommendation from the committee. So those are sort of the initial impacts, and I want to talk about some of the longer term impacts, which are the economic development and the legislative. So some of the long-term structural imbalances and the challenges is really to look at some of the city-owned property that isn't being used for sale or development. Examining the development in the gateway urban growth area and some of the things that go along with that. Of course, that brings in additional costs. So we need to think about that. Looking at a business retention and expansion strategy, which is a key thing for economic development, and also looking at pursuing tax reform in Oregon, which is a much longer term thing. Looking at economic development and recruitment, how can we really go after a big win for economic development and leveraging some of the local business and industry advocacy to help us not just go on our own, pushing for some of the changes at the legislative level, but work together. Everyone's facing these challenges. We are not the only ones. So how do we all work together to do that? There's some other ideas of looking at allocation, state and county shared revenue, supporting police recruitment at the legislative, and working with the League of Oregon Cities to remove restrictions on the cities. So these were the main things. Deferred maintenance really wasn't covered in this work, and we have quite a backlog, as many organizations in Oregon have deferred maintenance is not something that is easily budgeted for. We don't get money for it. We're often short of dollars. But these were some of the concerns. We need to think about that. We need to really engage with the community. That's why we're here today. And try not to do too many things at once. It's easy for us to take a plan and say, oh, great, okay, let's do everything, but really thoughtfully think about this. The mayor and I were talking on the way over here. The Springfield way is to do things well and to do it with the community in mind. And so I think that's been a hallmark of this plan is how do we thoughtfully engage and make sure we're not moving too fast and doing things that would unintentionally impact people, which has been quite good. So I'll go back from this and then turn it over to the mayor to do the fun stuff because he's much more interested than me.
Thank you so much for coming and starting this discussion with us. This is about the third discussion that we've done. Really point in the process that we're at is the city council has this right now. We're taking it out in front of the public to start answering questions and gathering information so that the city council can talk about the report more in depth in September, and then really get to a more solid strategy going into the fall about how to implement some of these things to work our way through this. One thing I will note for you is we do have the fire levy list out right now, right? So that will be on the November ballot. If you read the report, I'm sure everybody did, but I'll condense it down for you. The ask, one of the recommendations is to make adjustments to make sure we're covering the full costs of providing city services. Well, the first time the public will see that is that actually this fire levy inventory in November. Ultimately, government sometimes works on a well-written report. And this is really designed to get us to a point where we agree upon a strategy as a community, so we really can start putting this issue behind us. I know a lot of people have questions. So I could start taking questions. I could entertain you with plenty of folksy stories about the Springfield if you want this wrong. But really, City Club's about the discussion. So if people want to start with questions, we can dive into that. Yes, sir.
Hey, certainly appreciate the work that you're doing and know how difficult it must be. So thank you for that. Thanks for being with us today. My name is Jim Lawyer. I'm a new resident in Springfield. And I am right now a volunteer for the library. So you kind of know where I'm coming from. I was struck by what you said just now, or what you said a moment ago, about do it well and do it with the community in mind. And that was sort of where I was constantly stirring the community in mind. And I noticed that fairness to the community on your evaluation criteria was sort of a modest vote on that one. Last week, I had an interesting week of comparing different things. I started with watching on PBS a new release called Free for All, the history of libraries in America. And I strongly recommend that you all can do this. Plus, it's coming to now. I think it's coming to Will
Wildish.
Thank you. I know all these names are in it. A real solid piece that showed how libraries over the centuries have been the pillars of developing community and business and growth of democracy. And we're still doing it. I think we're sitting on a solid pillar with the Springfield Library. I was the first one watching it, so I'm going to make that mistake again. I think that what you are proposing from one of the smaller entities of the general fund, 5%, or 21% decrease in the library is really pretty darn severe. That's very, very good. To keep the library a part of the city in a positive way. Little things I came across also last week was there enough community response in the task force? I understood from listening to reading something I came across my desk. 12 task force members, with 10 being from the business community. 7 of those did not live in Springfield, was there enough, a community conversation in that? So that's kind of where I'm trying.
Sure, we can pick that up. The first thing I would tell you is you gotta see, you gotta see the cut conversation in broader context. The city's been working on like cost containment for probably 20 years. If you go back and you read budgets from the 90s, you see the same message as soon as Measure 5 comes around, like this is gonna be a problem, this is gonna be a problem, right? So I think it's important when you think about how like cuts in an organization to think about everything that we've potentially done, and I'll give you a quick example. The both police and fire took a significant cut in this last budget, right? So I want folks to see that really what's happening is we're seeing broad-based cuts. It just happens to be that it comes up in the library in this case. The other piece is the library's thought very well within this community, right? So it's not, I don't think you can see this as sort of like a judgment against literacy, right? The library is an important part of the community. My kids go to the library, right? Like, so it is something that's an important part of how we get people and have positive impacts with the community. The other piece is, I think when you look at this, think of this as the public conversation, right? Like I wouldn't rely so far onto that who's on the initial task force, because that is a technical piece to try to work through budgets. We're the public part of it, right? The city council is the folks that do the public participation and weigh the public's input. So our opportunity as a broader citizenship to weigh in happens at this point and let the council weigh all that material. So I think that's also important. And then lastly, I will tell you that this isn't a finished product. This is more in the mid-game, right? So there's a question about, okay, what is $500,000 from a library mean? We don't know that question. We don't know the answer to that question yet, right? That is a question the staff has to work through and think through, but there is an opportunity for you as a library patron to really tell me, I'll give you the decoder ring about what I'm paying attention to, which is, the library provides a lot of services. What's the most important thing to you? Is the most important thing a physical hours that we're open? Is the most important thing being out in the community? Or is the most important thing other programming that we do provide? That is actually very useful information as we weigh this conversation. So I know that there's a lot there in that answer, but I want you to know that the library's thought very well. Like we think of literacy is really. All right. Next question. Yes, ma'am.
Your team of consultants that wrote up the Task Force Stability Fiscal Report cost $137,000, $137,866. That's expensive. And one of the things that wasn't on their cut list was hiring consultants. I went through a word search from the city council agendas and looking for consultants, and you hired 4 consultants over the year. And the total cost came to $498,000, which is just what you're gonna cut from the library. So I would suggest no more consultants.
So just to be clear, that $430,000 is not for this project. Some of that money.
No, it was for over the year
Correct.
for 4 different projects. Consultants. Well, you left this off. Everything was on the table. You left this off.
No, I don't think this piece was left off the table at all, right? But I want to make sure everybody walks out of this room very clearly, right? The $430,000 was not related, like some of that cost was associated with this project, but it was also, associated with broad-based projects. The other thing I will tell you about consultants coming from, when you think about the civic world, is consultant is a broad term. It's also used for what you would think of in the private sector is contractors or sort of backfill workforce. Some of that work is technical things that we don't normally house in a city, we don't have the technical ability to do, or simply just extra workforce, right? So I don't know that without going through that list, sitting down and going through that list with you, if we would be able to say we could just get rid of all consultants here. But I do want you to recognize, well, to walk away with this conversation feeling like that some of that is associated to technical things that the city doesn't do, or some of that is just additional workforce we do. Consultants is a broad-based term. So, all right, other questions? Yes, sir.
Mayor, this is a thankless task you and the committee have undertaken, and I really appreciate it. The one thing I don't see in the list of long-term or even other term alternatives is the possibility of working with our neighbors across I-5 to create a fire district which could relieve significant pressure from the general fund and actually prevent a reduction in property taxes for some period of time and let it go back up.
So if you read the report, right, there's a fire governance conversation that's going on between the cities right now, and that was excluded from this intentionally because the elected officials are chatting about that in the meeting right now. So I want to start there. The second piece is, that work really has to take, run its course. Right now, I have not seen anything in the fire district that tells me that that's going to save people more money. I'm still curious about what that's gonna, happen. And when you look at the compression statistics that are associated with both the city of Eugene and the city of Springfield, I'll talk about the city of Springfield. I don't think there's enough headroom to seriously evaluate a fire district. And then lastly, I want to back up and just talk about the things I hear in this community about property taxes. A fire district's gonna cost more money, right? Everything around here is gonna cost more money. But the one thing that our community keeps telling me is that people are concerned about seniors, people are concerned about keeping people in their homes and the cost of living in Springfield. And so while we're working through this, I'm seeing it from the lens of how do I get to a position where we've really gotten past this structural conversation, but also balance that with a sense that we've got to be competitive on the business front, and we've got to be competitive for the cost of living point in the city of Springfield. And I haven't seen anything from a fire district perspective that makes me feel like they're getting us around that corner. That doesn't mean that won't come up at some point. But a great question. Yes, sir.
So, part of the thing was to pursue tax reform in Oregon and economic development, so we are increasing the revenue. Could you kind of flesh out what you're looking at in terms of what you mean by tax reform and any ideas in terms of the economy?
Yeah, so tax reform really is the city making sure that we're available to weigh in on conversations around Measure 5, Measure 47, and Measure 50. There is some interest at the state level about having a task force about what would reforms potentially look like. It is a very complicated topic. The council and myself have definitely raised our hands saying we will gladly sit on a task force about that conversation to share Springfield's, Springfield's sense of it. But I also want to make sure I don't want to participate in a statewide conversation that is not serious and not going someplace, right? So if we get involved in it, I want some certainty that at the end of it, there's going to be something that somebody's going to take seriously. Back to the opening point, government works on a well-written report sometimes. Economic development is an important part of this. As a city, we have to continue to grow. We have economic opportunity right along this riverfront right now. And we have economic opportunity in, up in North Gateway, across the city, right? You see people continue to invest in this community, which I'm thankful for. I will give you some perspective of why economic opportunity sort of balances this out. Everybody know where Mercola Meadows is? Okay, I'm glad the city people are nodding yes. For the record, I do too. So if you think about all those people that came to our community in Mercola Meadows, it's the city to provide services. Rock gets about the same amount of money to provide services as we will get when the Roseboro expansion it really gets off the economic development, the enterprise zone. So you gotta find like. In a city that needs housing, we have to find a balance between finding the economic growth that actually makes sure that teachers and firefighters are paying. And also having, you know, affordability in places for people to live. Yes, sir.
I was kind of surprised to see traffic cameras be one of the top suggestions being considered. I just wondered how will they be set up, and are they really gonna generate that much money with the not recommendation?
We don't know yet. I think, remember, we're at the midpoint, right? So some of this stuff is getting vetted and some of this stuff, this is getting sort of talked about and worked through. When I look at the top recommendations, traffic cameras for me is not the thing to spend a lot of early time on. Because we have to spend early time on the things that is gonna essentially address the fiscal cliff the city faces. The two people that use traffic cameras right now have mixed results. We'll do a little bit of research on it. I don't know at the end of the day if that makes the cut or not. That really is, that is really up to the council. Yes, sir.
Yes, as a long-term Springfield resident in Ward 2, I do understand that there's been a lot of inflation and that there is a reason to adjust some of our levies. However, the Fiscal Task Force stated on its first page that everything is on the table. And on the second page, they said, we're not discussing police and fire. I think that to increase, which the fire levy would be a 40% funding boost in that. And at the same time, to decrease funding by, as the gentleman said, 20% for the library, I think is deeply unfair. And so I feel as if levy increases to increase the general fund are definitely warranted. But I feel to target them to one part of the budget and to target another for serious reductions is really wrong. In addition, I think that the overtime and the jail are both budget killers. And I believe the fire department also is a budget killer. And I think if we need to reduce overtime in all of those instances, maybe we can institute some sort of agreement with the unions to have people on call at quarter time instead of on time and a half on the clock. I also believe that we should probably disband the Springfield Economic Development Association and sell all the properties. Because CETA has spent a lot of money and we really have not seen a lot of results in CETA. And it's been ongoing for quite a few years that we have to.
So I'm gonna take those in a couple of different levels, right? One of the things that with the fire, specifically the fire levy, that really is there to fund a fifth engine that is in the central part of the city. So if we take that engine out, right, there is a big hole, donut hole size in how we respond to across the city. And it is normal from a city perspective to strategize around asking the voters, you know, what exactly they want to pay for. Now, I think if you read the report, right, which clearly you have, that the only thing that was really off the table was fire governance. And that was specifically because we were working that with another group of folks. If you go through the committee, they did talk about the jail. They did talk about police overtime. They did talk about all these kind of elements that you chatted through. And I think in that conversation, you know, there's a deep commitment among the city staff to address things like, you know, police overtime that is trending downwards. They got into that and they learned a lot as a task force about it and felt more comfortable with it. Now, when you think about like what your comment about what the Economic Development Agency does, you know, like there is a couple ways to look at that, right? But downtown as it exists today, which is a gem of the city, would not exist without CETA. CETA pays for a lot of things that promoted development in downtown, helped make sure that, you know, it was clean and ready for our families to access in a safe perspective. I recognize this is really complicated. And I think there's an opportunity to take your feelings that say, hey, the library is really important to me, and I feel deeply unfair that I feel like, they're being called out, and give that feedback back to the council so that they can weigh it. That's what the public process is for. Alright, what other questions? I'll even take more questions from generally about Springfield. We don't have any online questions?
Not yet.
Okay.
One further question, Mayor. Would the payroll tax be locally administered, or would you access that to, say, ODR or something of that nature?
That is a detail that is still being worked out. I will tell you on the payroll tax, there's probably the most depth there. It's something that needs to be sort of talked about and socialized, with the business community. The conversation that we've had with the public has been very, very helpful to sort of understanding what is really important, to sort of protect from a competitiveness perspective. And, when the public really has asked us to make sure we take care of seniors, right? Bring more people into to pay for services, and then really think about homeowners, that the payroll tax really checks off all of those boxes, right? That's why it made the list. Okay.
Can you talk a little bit more about September 2nd and what is going to be talked about during the work session?
Yeah. This is the marathon. So we're not gonna get to everything on September 2nd. September 2nd really is us regrouping, is a council and sharing some of this information, as well as more information around what a payroll tax might look like. Some of the questions around what people bring up from the library perspective, and talking about how we want to go forward. I'm expecting that we will probably have 2 or 3 conversations about this throughout the fall. Before, I want to get to 2 things when we vote on it, right? I want to give clear direction to the city manager that we are behind this stuff, and let her go out and implement it. And I want to have, some sort of strategic artifact that is kind of the center of how we kind of build the strategic plan for the city over the next couple of years. That's going to take a couple of conversations. It's not going to get done, by this 2nd of September. There's still plenty of time to have share a lot of information. Yes, sir.
This is a very ignorant question. I probably should know this, but could you describe the structural deficit that is discussed in the total? Where does that come from? Why is the whole thing?
And Anne Marie's gonna give you a color for that question. So Springfield is not out of the ordinary with a structural deficit. One of the things that I do professionally is financial, forecasting and planning. It is normal for a big organization 4 or 5 years out to see some sort of structural deficit, because frankly, you haven't done anything yet to address those. Our business community goes to that every single day. If you did your household budgets 6 years out, you would see some things that were probably challenging, right? For governments, you've had a couple of things that contributed to it. One of them is you have to, that ultimately we were a timber county, right? So, probably, I don't know, 2/3 of the county was owned by the government at some point. Early on, we were getting timber receipts, like in the road fund, we used to get $1 million a year from timber money that went directly in to service our roads, right? So you've got to kind of understand that the change in Oregon economics from the timber industry is, would have impacted that. Also, Oregon has got a fairly prescriptive land use, regime, if you will. Thanks, Tony. It can make growth and development relatively challenging, and I say that in a non-judgmental way, right? Like, it helps protect Oregon's beauty, but it makes economic development challenging at times, right? So it makes it part that city is very constrained in its boundaries, right? That makes development relatively hard. And then you've got financial structures that sort of limit the amount of how our income can grow. That's measure 5, 47, and 50. If you look at your tax bill, you're taxed on a significantly less amount of your house than what it is worth on the market area. So now you layer in, let's just say, the worst inflation that we've seen in this century, right? All those, that package of stuff is really what's contributing to, what the financial picture of the city looks like. That's where the deficit's coming from. It's things that are outside of our control. We still have to deal with it, but they're very big structural headwinds about funding the city. And then lastly, I think it's really important to point out the city doesn't do that many things, right? It deals with public works, it's got public safety, it's got libraries, it's got, a small economic development department. So it's not like we're a very big city. Great question. All right, other questions? You guys are quiet bunch. Yes, ma'am.
So I just pulled up the city's website because I was thinking I should probably know the answer to this. How exactly can community members give the specific feedback that they're talking about? I don't see like a new feedback on the budget here button on the homepage.
We're having a bunch of people hold up a card that's got a QR code that has got a survey. Those surveys will be collected for the city council. And any level of feedback helps, right? Anything that is like, hey, good job, you guys got it right, or hey, I don't like this question around consultants, or this question around, hey, we need to support libraries. All of that information is helpful. If you don't want to do the survey, there is a secret decoder ring to give us feedback. You can always email, your elected officials, and they're happy to get, take those emails and share them as a group so we can consider everybody's perspective.
Is the survey being distributed in other ways as well, or is it just on the QR code?
It is on the QR code in community events like this. We have breaking news. I've done a reel for the first time. Or right at the third time. And there will be a social media star to help promote it. If you can share it with as many people as possible, right? That would be helpful. That would be helpful.
And is there a reason why it's not just released on the homepage of the city's website?
I think it was.
We'll have to look at that, right?
Isn't it?
That's above my pay grade.
I think it's on this.
I thought it was on the stability landing page.
Yeah, so.
We appreciate the feedback. It is good. We will take a look at it.
Other community presentations, we're happy to come to any community.
If you have more than 2 people there, you can invite me and I'm happy to share that.
Yeah, so as you alluded to, this is not a Springfield only problem. So 2-part question here. One, how has Springfield approached this conversation on this? So it's been different from other communities in Oregon. And then second, even our neighboring communities, county are having this conversation too. What's the strategy for a regional conversation?
The strategy really comes back to those 4 pillars, right? Like when last summer I started talking about this with the city manager, going, no matter what, it's got to get dealt with, right? If we don't do anything, the city manager is required to bring us a budget that balances, right? So it'll be 100% with cuts. So we started talking about how do we figure out with the community how to navigate this situation, and that led to these 4 pillars. And specifically, my goal with the 4 pillars was to try to put everything on the table for folks, leave the task force, and try to get a very clear opinion about it. But I wanted to make sure that we just didn't have a revenue task force, but we had this conversation about cuts and what that might look like. And we had this conversation around legislative and economic development so that we could settle on a broad-based strategy about it. And realistically, that has given us some of the stuff we knew, right? So getting the head nod that we got it right is good. And then some of the material, started a new conversation, like the traffic cameras was sort of net new, like that came out of the committee. We didn't give it in the material, but they talked about it. So one of the things I wanna do is, as a community, is make sure whatever this is, we get to some general agreement, this is how we're going to address it. And try to put it behind us, going forward, so it's not always hanging out there, for this conversation. This stuff's really, really hard. I also was very aware of how other communities have chosen to try to adapt this, and I tried to take some of their feedback about what works and what doesn't. This is a very Springfield process. It really did work for us. More broadly, other communities that are going through this, there are some regional conversations around there. I think I'm open to having, coordination conversations as they develop. We're all in different spots. There's a county one that is just starting, the city of Eugene one, I'm not 100% sure where it is, but, when we have areas that we could partner, we're gonna have those conversations. And then lastly, I will tell you that, it's very easy to say, they work together better. But our communities are very different, and we have very different expectations for how we get served, right? So even though, we all kind of use the same plow, right? We do want to have some sort of control from a Springfield perspective on, like, how do we do public works for Springfield? So we gotta find that balance as well. That's a great question. Okay, any other questions that are out there? Please take the time to do the survey. It genuinely does help. And just to really end on kind of the path forward from here, right? The committee was about getting technical expertise from folks that in this community that had a technical expertise around, business and finance, and, there was a couple people who supported the library. But it was really about answering the technical question around how we go forward. We're in the part right now that is gathering public input and having a broader community conversation. One former city councilor put it to me this way: you had a great 11-person committee. Now you have to make a committee of 60,000 people. And I thought that was relatively relevant. So with that, I think I'm ready to turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you all for joining us today. Don't forget to take the card with the survey link on it. Is the packet on the table? Did you get the fruit? Okay, just the card. And a link to the Fiscal Stability Task Force report was in the City Club emails that have gone out, so you're welcome to go read that. There's also a landing page of the city that has quite a bit of information on the report and the process and where you can engage. I'll see you all September 2nd, City Council, with more. Our next program for City Club is going to be September 4th. Yes. And we'll be talking about local journalism, because it's really important that things like this work gets reported to the general public and creates awareness. And we're really quite lucky in the Springfield Eugene area to have a couple of incredible local journalism organizations. And so look at Eugene Springfield, and the Chronicle will be here at Roaring Rapids on September 4th to talk about what they're doing. And with that, thank you all for coming.